last episode, I talked about why women speaking up today can feel so disruptive, and why that shift is connected to changes in law, economics, and social freedom. In this episode, I want to look at something that really sits underneath that reaction, and that's identity. For many men, the structure of patriarchal society did not just shape power. It shaped how they understood themselves, and how they fitted into the grand scheme of things. And boys have traditionally been raised with a very narrow definition of masculinity. From a young age, many are taught that showing emotion is a weakness, that asking for help is a failure, and that their role in life is to provide, protect, and stay in control. And success often becomes tied to things like status, income, and authority. Emotional range becomes very limited because vulnerability is discouraged. When a system teaches generation after generation of men that their worth is connected to control, leadership, and provision, those roles become their identity. So when women gain financial independence, question authority, or challenge unequal expectations inside relationships and inside society, it can feel more like a social change. It can feel like the ground under that identity is shifting. If you were raised to believe that your value comes from being the provider or the one in charge, what happens when those roles are now shared? And that question can create confusion and defensiveness, not necessarily because men want to dominate, but because the model they were given for masculinity is very limited. It's very small. And this is why conversations about the feminine rising are sometimes, in fact, very often, misunderstood as attack on men. And that is not what we're doing. When people hear that the feminine needs to be restored in society, they may interpret that as, well, their masculinity has to be rejected. It's kind of like asymmetrical bias. But the deeper conversation is not about removing men from leadership or diminishing masculine qualities. It's about expanding what leadership and strength look like. A healthy society needs decisiveness, it needs structure, it needs forward movement. But it also needs emotional intelligence, cooperation, care, consideration to long-term well-being and sustainability. And when those qualities exist together, leadership becomes more balanced. And this is where the conversation becomes very important for men as well as women. Patriarchal systems did not only suppress the feminine in women, they also suppressed it in men. And men were very much discouraged from developing emotional literacy. They were discouraged from expressing vulnerability or from participating fully in relational and caregiving roles. Many men are now beginning to question that model because it does not allow them to experience the full range of human connection, the full range of being human. When the feminine rises in society, it invites men into a broader way of being, a more complete way of being. It allows them to step out of rigid roles that say their only value is in providing, their only value is in controlling. It creates space for partnership instead of hierarchy, and for shared responsibility instead of fixed expectations. And this doesn't weaken masculinity. In fact, it has the opposite effect. It expands it. It cements it. It makes it stronger. It allows men to be leaders without needing to dominate, to be strong without disconnecting from emotion. And the shift we are seeing right now is challenging because it asks both men and women to rethink identities that have been reinforced for generations. Women are stepping out of roles that required silence, compliance, shrinking ourselves, and accommodating others. And men are being asked to move beyond models of masculinity that limited emotional depth and relational presence. When both of those changes happen at the same time, the transition feels very tense, very uncomfortable. But that tension often appears whenever societies begin to move from rigid hierarchy toward a more balanced relationship. The feminine rising, in this sense, is not simply a movement for women. It's not a one-sided thing. It's a global cultural shift that's inviting everyone to integrate qualities that have been neglected for centuries. It asks us to reconsider how we define strength, how do we define leadership, how do we define success, and how do we build systems that value cooperation and responsibility alongside things like ambition and growth.